And I had asked for advice about imposter syndrome many times before that, but that was the conversation where it clicked for me. And I realized that if I'm not making this about my disadvantage and making this about the fact that I am the only woman at this table, or making it about the fact that I'm the only person in her 20s at this table, fresh out of college, no life experience, if I'm not making it about that and I'm making it about the work, then every single day I can show up and just do my absolute best. And every woman knows, especially any ambitious woman knows, that there is no room for mediocre women in this. We know that we have to work harder, that we have to work smarter, that we have to be so dedicated to be able to solve these problems. But the weight off of our backs that we don't need to carry is being consumed with whether or not we deserve to be in that room.
Welcome to Ops Talk, where we explore the ideas driving the fire service forward and the people behind them. I'm your host, Eric Linnenburger, and my guest today is certainly doing that. So many of us have good ideas, but very few execute on them. At 22 years old, Bailey Farren did exactly that. She identified a gap in large-scale emergency response, built a company to fill it, and earned her way onto the Forbes 30 Under 30 list along the way. She's the founder and CEO of Perimeter. She's also the daughter of first responders, so she gets it, and she gets us. She brings knowledge, an innovative approach, and energy for days. I'm so excited for this conversation. Bailey, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Eric. It's great to be here.
Bailey, I would love to start out just to give the audience a little bit of background on you and, just tell us a little bit about where you come from. We're going to get into Perimeter as we go, but I think they need to know the person behind it because that's why we're here today. Can you just kind of start with your background, growing up in a first responder home and how that inspired you to do what you're doing now?
Absolutely. I think growing up in a first responder home is the biggest competitive advantage that I had when I started building in the public safety world. And it's definitely not the direction that I ever anticipated going, but I was homeschooled for almost my entire life. And so when I say that I grew up in the firehouse, I really grew up in the firehouse. And one of the biggest gifts that I've had in this world is being able to continue walking into these public safety agencies and these fire departments. I walk in and I immediately feel like I'm at home. And that's been one of the greatest parts of building in this space is I get to spend so much time with people who feel like family and frankly are my heroes as well and have been since I was a little kid.
So tell us a little bit more about your family. Your mom, she was a paramedic and your dad a firefighter, is that correct?
That's right. My dad was a firefighter paramedic. My mom was a medic, and they met when they were paramedics in Oakland in the 1980s. So I was born in the East Bay after they met. And when I was about 6 months old, my dad got hired at Petaluma Fire Department in Sonoma County, California. And that's when we moved over there. So my mom stayed in EMS and was in quality assurance. And my dad retired in 2017 from the fire service.
So you do know us, you know our quirks, you know our craziness, you know our traditions as well, which has to make it a little bit hard. We're going to talk about Perimeter here in a bit, but I know it couldn't have been easy to break in. I'm just so curious about the person that was able at 22 years old to figure this thing out, figure out this need, this passion, and just go for it. You were still in college, right, when you started this?
I was, yes. And when I started, I did not intend to start a company. At first, all of this happened as a research project because of my evacuation from the Tubbs fire. When I was evacuated from Tubbs, I was just so shocked that we had no information about where to go, how to get there. We didn't know where the fire was. We didn't know where the roads were closed. And at the time, I assumed that all of the first responders, like my parents, that they had the information that they needed to make decisions and that it was all tied in. So they were all looking at the same picture. And of course, you know what I didn't at the time, which is actually all of these groups have a lot of information that is extremely siloed. And so what I didn't know during the Tubbs fire is I didn't have a picture, but also the first responders on the front lines, they also were relying on paper maps and radios during that fire and the subsequent fires that I was evacuated from in Sonoma County.
So talk about that experience a little bit more, if you don't mind. Why were you evacuated? Or I think you were coming to help out your mom, if I remember that. We've talked about this a little bit. Can you just talk about that experience, that firsthand experience?
Absolutely. I wasn't supposed to be in Santa Rosa that day. I was, as you mentioned, a student at UC Berkeley, and I was working at an AI company in Sunnyvale. And so the morning of the Tubbs fire evacuation, I had just pulled up to my office in Sunnyvale, and I commuted really early to beat Bay Area traffic. So it was about 6 a.m. when I got there. And when I stepped out of my car, it smelled like smoke, and it was really hazy. And this is in Sunnyvale in the South Bay Area. And Santa Rosa is about an hour and a half north. And I remember stepping outside of my car and just having this eerie feeling. And about 30 seconds later, I got a phone call from my brother saying that there's a fire in Santa Rosa. Our friends have already lost their homes and they're sheltering at my parents' house. And so the next question that I asked is, have you talked to mom? Because my mom had just had a major surgery after a scare with cancer. And so she was not in a position to evacuate herself. And so I end up driving north to go get her. And as I'm driving into Santa Rosa, of course, it's one of those days where it's extremely dark, even though it's the morning, the sun should be shining. There's ash falling from the sky, and it just maintains that really eerie feeling. By the time I go to get her, I'm trying to compile information about what to do and where to go. But, the best case scenario that we had at that point was social media, and everyone was just as confused as I was. And so that's why I happened to be in Santa Rosa. And I will say I also was in Santa Rosa for the other 4 mega fires that happened after Tubbs. So I have been evacuated 5 times from a county that I do not live in. And no, I am not starting these fires.
You know the history behind a lot of those fires, right? It's those firefighters, those fire investigators starting those fires. So maybe you were manifesting it for this company you were going to build.
Oh my
No, I'm just
gosh. Yeah.
joking.
People sometimes ask me, they're like, Bailey, are you happy that there are fires? And I'm like, of course not. Of course not. But the fires are going to continue. And so we need technology to answer the most critical life safety questions. And my perspective is people like my parents are really the heroes in this story. They are the ones running into the disasters that the rest of us are evacuating from. They deserve the best that technology has to offer. If I can track a burrito every foot on its way to my house, then my dad should be able to track the disaster that he's responding to when he's on the front lines of that incident. It seems pretty obvious to me.
Yeah, and you don't need hours and hours of training to learn how to track that burrito either. The
Yeah.
technology is so dang intuitive, and I think that's what we need more of in our fire service right now. A lot of, like I said in the intro, we've got a lot of great ideas people out there, but we need people that can execute. But we also need realistic technology that can be put in play today with minimal training and go.
Absolutely. And the
Um,
idea in 2026, the idea that we should need a training in order to use any kind of software, that is a cop-out. We do not need to use training in order to use any of the consumer apps that you and I are using day to day. That is an engineering and a UI UX and a design problem that technologists need to be solving. It's not a training issue that first responders should be paying for.
Yeah, I definitely didn't take a training the first time I used Uber or the first time, I DoorDashed some food. So it
That's
is
right.
the technology's there. It's amazing how it's not. I don't want to say we're far behind in the fire service. It's just that we've always done things a different way, and we do have some challenges, right? I mean, I'm sure, and we'll talk about it, I hope, just the challenges of working in a government focused industry as well. Like, we have challenges that the private sector doesn't. And we have security challenges and everything else. So it's not as easy as just as pushing this thing out and running with it. But I just a little bit more on you growing up. What makes a 22-year-old, like, where did you get this motivation? were you were you a salesperson growing up? I mean, did you have this in you all the time, or because I mean, you were obviously motivated because you're going to Berkeley. Berkeley, that's not chump change there,
Yeah.
and you're working at a
Yeah.
tech company, at an AI company while you're still in school, and so you're not lazy. But um, how'd you get there?
Yeah.
Have you
Yeah.
always been this way?
I think there are a few critical components of the way that I was raised that led to me starting this company. But again, I had I had some mentors who encouraged me to start this when I felt completely unqualified to do so. And so when I got into this space and after being evacuated from Tubbs, I don't just think to myself, well, I'm going to build something here. I'm going to build a team. We're going to raise money. That is not the thought process. But when I was a kid, I remember when I was 6 years old, my dad had a near fatal accident at the firehouse. He had been doing a trench cut on a roof of a burning building, and he got hit by the master stream of another department. And so when I was 6 years old, seeing him in the hospital with breathing tubes and chest tubes and seeing him in this situation, I realized from a really young age, my dad has a really dangerous job. And my dad, when he goes away for 48 hours at a time or more, when he's gone, he is potentially running into extremely dangerous scenarios to save the lives of strangers. And so from a really young age, I had such a deep respect for first responders, not just because they're my parents, but because I got to see the potential cost of the work that they were doing. And so that has played a really big role in deciding to start this company. On the other side of your question about sales, I do think that as an older sister with 3 little brothers, I'm a natural bossy salesperson. I think that comes with the territory when you're an older kid in a big family. And when I was younger, people ask me, Bailey, what internship, like what prepared you to start this
Mm-hmm.
company? But for me, running a baking company, like a cookie business when I was a kid, selling door to door, taught me so much
That's amazing.
of so many of the skills that I have used at Perimeter. And literally, as a homeschool kid, me and my neighbor, we were baking cookies and selling them door to door for years. And that turned out to be a very valuable skill set because in order to convince people to say yes to Perimeter, I was going door to door in fire departments nationwide to start conversations, showing up unannounced. And you can bet that part of that skill set was from having so many years of trying to sell cookies to people door to door. At that point, I was homeschooled. I just needed something to do.
So you're saying that this didn't just happen overnight. Like you worked. And I would love to talk a little bit more about that because I think that we do have an instant gratification world that we're living in right now. We see stuff we see with social media, things happen and we think that it just happened overnight. I imagine there was a grind, like a deep grind involved with this. And I think there are so many parallels for the fire service, whether it's just the getting through your day to day or, maybe you're seeking an opportunity in leadership. So many parallels and so many lessons here. I'd love for you to talk about that grind a little bit because you had first responders as parents. I'm guessing you didn't grow up extremely wealthy where they just fed you as much money as you needed to start this company. Like you had to go out and sell and earn it. And I'm guessing there was a fundraising component to it and a big grind involved in it. Can you just talk about that a little bit, what that process was like? Or it still is,
Absolutely.
I bet.
Still is. And you're right. We didn't have a lot of money growing up, 2 first responder parents, 5 kids. You can probably do the math. But it turns out that became a gift for me in a lot of ways because I had to pay my way through Berkeley. My parents were not able to help me financially with college. And so having to work full time while I was in school also exposed me to a lot of different aspects of the technology world. And, even before I was working in tech, I was a waitress for 5 years. And so there are all these things that I had to do to figure out how to pay my way through school and pay rent. And all of those experiences taught me the skills that I needed to be able to run this company. And that's kind of a myth that we have in the Silicon Valley world. We think the skills and the attributes that make you right for being a founder are being a Harvard computer science technology dropout. Like we have the images in our head of,
Sure.
people like Mark Zuckerberg, and we
Sure.
think that's what a founder looks like. But if you grow up in a first responder family, you start to learn that actually the person who anyone needs at that point, like if you collapse at a restaurant, you need someone to respond quickly, and you need someone to be able to do their best even if they don't have all of the answers. And so what I learned is it's not about having the best idea, but it's about being willing to show up and keep learning every day. And to your point about leadership, I think the first threshold that we have to pass, or the first hurdle that we have to overcome, is this ability to see ourselves as qualified. Because when I was 22 and I was starting this, I did not feel like I was qualified at all. But when I sat down with one of my professors, I was telling him about this fire research project that I'd been doing. And at that time, the campfire was burning. So on UC Berkeley's campus, during the campfire, people are wearing N95 masks because the smoke is so bad. This is pre-2020. It's pre-COVID. It's pre the orange sky. But the smoke is so bad that the students are wearing N95 masks. I have friends and family who both evacuate from Paradise and who respond to the campfire. And so I sit down with my professor and I say, someone has to do something about this. Like someone has to build technology that people like my dad can use when they're responding to these fires. And my instructor, Shomit Ghose, said, "You're right, Bailey, you have to do something about it." And so at the time, if he hadn't said that, I was not thinking that I could do something about it. That's not the thought process in my mind. But a big part of leadership is in having leaders take you along and show you something about yourself that you might not have seen. And so leaders have a lot of power to look at someone and say, I see something in you that others might not see and that you might not see. But that can have a huge impact on someone's ability to take the first step. And then on the same note, I think one of the biggest challenges that we have to overcome after that first step that we take is any kind of imposter syndrome that we have around continuing. Because we might have the idea, oh, I could build something. But to stay in the game, like you said, it's a long game. And so you have to be able to see yourself as being someone who can stay in the game and keep showing up every day, even when you don't have the answers, because you will never have all the answers.
And we all need to be reminded of that over and over and over again. Because I think we all still do. I mean, if you care about something enough, I think you're going to have a little bit of imposter syndrome because you're so invested in it. I think that's just a great story, especially on the mentor side. I always feel like we get mentorship wrong. Like we're looking for some all-knowing person to come out and seek us out and put their arm around us and say, walk the path with me. I'm going to show you every turn. And it's not that. It's the mentee being open and ready to receive. That's number one. But then it's timing and it's those natural lessons. And in the end, you're the one doing the work. You got the nudge. You were told by somebody it's okay, but you're the one doing the work. And I think that's true mentorship and such a lesson for everyone.
And we have a lot more power than we think from a mentorship perspective. Even being a couple steps ahead of somebody on the path, or being a year ahead of someone whether that's in school or in the fire service or in a company, being just a little ahead of someone gives you a position to be able to look at them and say, hey, I really see something in you. And I believe that you can do something. And at the end of the day, that's what you need to stay in the game, is that belief that you can keep figuring it out. And I was so fortunate in the early days that I had a few people who I sat down with from UC Berkeley. I mentioned Shomit Ghose. One of my other instructors, Ken Singer, were the two people who really believed in me. And I had to go and be rejected by hundreds and hundreds of venture capitalists before I was able to raise any money for this. And so it was like 1 to 100 in terms of the people who believed in me versus the people who said, Bailey, this is crazy. You'll destroy your reputation before you're 25 years old, and this will never work. And versus the people who said, Bailey, you got this. Just keep trying, keep learning, keep showing up, keep asking for help, keep doing your best every day. But it doesn't matter what the ratio is, because if you have someone who looks at you and believes in you that you respect, you're willing to keep going through all that hardship, all that rejection, all those challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. I think about that, and the hundreds and hundreds of calls you're making and pitches that you're making, and I wonder, just especially the challenge that must be there working in this industry, compared to, especially if you're going and pitching to, and I don't know a lot about the game, but venture capitalists who are there to make money. They're investing to make money. So was there a mismatch there when you went in hoping to, you're also trying to make a living off this. Of course you want to make this your job, but that allows you then to give something back as well. And there's an altruistic component to it. I'm guessing the venture capitalists aren't looking at it from an altruistic way. So how did you, number one, was there a mismatch there, and how did you remedy that, or how have you worked through that?
There was a huge mismatch for me working in Silicon Valley and trying to raise from venture capitalists, because at the time, especially, I remember one pitch in particular. I had just finished a ride along on the Kincaid fire, another fire that I was evacuated from, but I was able to ride with public safety after my evacuation. And I was so disheartened at that incident, seeing all of the challenges that continue to exist on the technology side. And I was frustrated because I'm not coming to this space without feeling a personal skin in the game. And when I say skin in the game, I don't mean just like, my own, money that I'm investing, which, yes, I put everything I owned into Perimeter, but I didn't own that much. So it was everything that I had. But I was so frustrated that I was seeing all these loved ones of mine who were running around, responding to this incident with nothing. And at the time I mentioned that I was working in AI. So I know that there are millions of data points being used today to determine if we're going to show Eric a Nike ad or an Adidas ad. There's so much. The best the technology has to offer is being used to sell people more stuff. And so I felt this moral dilemma, and personally so frustrated with the fact that all of that technology, all of those resources and that talent, that it was getting poured into selling people stuff and not saving people's lives. And so the mismatch for me in Silicon Valley is when I left the Kincaid fire and I went back to pitching, I'm not talking about things like the market, the potential of this kind of a business to yield venture-backed returns. I'm going in with this perspective that people should want to solve hard, high-impact problems. And what I learned the hard way in Silicon Valley is that is not why investors invest. And they told me that. They said, Bailey, this is great. I see the need for this. But, we don't invest in, what they said often was, we don't invest in nonprofits. And Perimeter is not a nonprofit. We wanted to set up the company to be able to raise venture-backed funds. But because of the way that I framed it, because I was so mission-driven, everyone came back to, oh my gosh, this is nice. It's really cute that your dad's a firefighter, but there couldn't possibly be a big enough space for this type of solution. They said, first responders don't need new technology. Fire departments don't buy technology. It would be impossible to build a product like Perimeter. And they said fires just really aren't that big of a problem. Of course, what we know now is none of those things are true. But back in 2019 and 2020, this is before the fire tech revolution that's been happening in the past 5 years. And so people had no exposure to this world. I had to learn as a CEO and founder not to just go in and frame the magnitude of the problem, but to frame what could be possible if we actually were to build a solution that can reach this many agencies and have the kind of impact that we want to have. So I really had to learn a completely different vocabulary, something that could show the economic drivers behind what we're building and not just the lives that we could possibly save. But it took me a little while to learn that. I was really lucky, my co-founder and I both, that at the very beginning of 2020, we had 2 investors invest $30,000 in Perimeter, which helped us to pay the very, very early salaries of our engineers. And when I say salaries, I mean $2,000 a month. Like, as long as we could cover people's rent, we were happy.
Still eating ramen.
Yeah, very much eating ramen. My co-founder and I were drinking a lot of Soylent, if you know what that is. Terrible. Never do that. But during that time, we also won something called the Wesley Prize. And the Wesley Prize was this Innovation Impact Award for California technology college students or recent postgrads. And when Noah, my co-founder, and I won, it meant we both walked away with $20,000. And that prize that we won, it's the reason that Noah and I were able to go a year and a half with no salary. And that's what it often takes when you're building something for the first time, especially if you're not able to fundraise. You have to figure out a way to finance it yourself. And so looking back, those first 2 investors, Paul Holloman and David Fox, who invested in us, even, a small amount, it had an enormous impact on our ability to survive COVID and eventually raise our first round in 2021.
Yeah, so that can't be understated either. The fact that you're trying to do all this during a pandemic, it was total chaos.
Yes.
No one knew what was going to happen. And I'm sure nobody wanted to invest in something like this at that time, right? Because all of our efforts were other areas. So holy cow, like just add that to the challenge list, right?
Yep, absolutely. And again, I'm so fortunate that a few people really believed in us, because all we were doing every day was getting rejected on Zoom by VCs. And I used to say that the only thing worse than having to be on Zoom every day for a year is being rejected on Zoom every day for a year. And again, I feel so fortunate that we had a few people who believed in us, because that's one of the reasons why we stayed in the game, because we had a few people who said, you can do this. And because we knew that at the time in your early 20s, it's like, what else are we going to do? Go work at Uber or go work at Facebook and get paid to spend all of your time figuring out if we should move a pixel like to the left or to the right in order to make more money for billionaires? It's like, what else are we going to do with our time? Why not try to solve the hardest, most important problem that we've been exposed to? It's like, what did we have to lose?
Yeah, just so much respect for sticking with it. I think we struggle to stick with things now, and especially with all those challenges you had, and just without the funds, you can't move on. And so I can only imagine how much that little bit of money helped, but also just with the confidence piece as well, to say that, oh, no, this does have great merit. And I'm glad you're here now, because I think you're filling such an important gap. And it is one of those, and it's tough on our end, I think, in the fire service, because we know how important these things are, but we have a million different things going on as well. And it seems like it becomes then that reactionary piece. Companies like yours provide us an opportunity to be proactive, and instead of being reactionary like we often are. And that's what we're trained to do, right? The 911 call goes out, and then we respond, we go fix the problem. But if we're going to get anywhere, we really do need to start being proactive. And I think that's what our communities are expecting as well. Let's go ahead and let's talk a little bit more about Perimeter. If you don't mind just talking, just get in the weeds a little bit too, so that people know where it comes, because coming from a place of benefit to the citizens, people like you trying to evacuate from those fires, not knowing where to go, but then also it's there to help the emergency responders. So if you could hit it from kind of both angles, I think it'd be helpful.
Absolutely. So Perimeter is a platform that is designed to integrate across all of these different agencies that are responding to, it could be a fire, a flood, an active assailant, but even a special event, FIFA and the 250th were big use cases for us because, of course, there's so much coordination happening across agencies during those types of planned events. And so what we do is we integrate across all of those different groups in order to create a shared picture of what's happening. And we talked a little bit about this earlier, but our fundamental belief is that software should not require trainings in order to use. And so the question that we always ask is, how can we get people the essential elements of information across all of these different agencies, whether that's fire, law enforcement, emergency management, public works, tourism departments, etc.? How can we get all of them the right information while integrating with their existing systems? Because as you know, firefighters like my dad, they don't want to use 12 different apps for things. They're already going to all these different places with all these different logins. And so not everybody wants to go to a new system in order to consume that information. Oftentimes, they want that information and that data fed into the systems that they already use, that are already a key part of their process. And so the question that we ask is, how can we integrate with those existing tools so they can see the information in the places where they go to for it without having, any barriers to then having information across agencies that they might not be able to get. I've heard the term silos of excellence many times in this space. And our goal is, how do we tie into those different silos in order to feed the data into the places where people really need it? And of course, offer them a platform when they're using a tool that they are really frustrated with, and they do want to be able to switch to a different common operating picture. So that's the public safety side of things. We integrate across these agencies and we create that shared picture, that shared common operating picture across all of these different groups, not just fire, but all of the other agencies that they're coordinating with. And then on the public side, what our partners do is they'll push relevant information, life safety data to the public as well. And so our goal is, again, on the public side, to integrate with the channels that already exist. So integrating with social media, with the alert and warning system that's being used, even having things printed as a QR code on flyers at grocery stores, at Airbnbs, at temporary places where folks might be if they're coming in from out of town. And then on the public side, everything is translated based on the browser settings of the individual, and everything is designed from the perspective of access and functional needs. That way, no matter who's clicking the link, who's looking at the map, they can see the information in the language that they speak, and they can see it in a way that's designed to be as consumable and accessible as possible.
Well, how, maybe just nuts and bolts wise, say you were evacuating from the Tubbs fire, how might you have used this on the public facing side?
Yeah. So the way people would use this, let's say for the Tubbs fire or any of the fires that are burning literally right now, is as a member of the public, you would probably either receive an alert based on, if you're from the community, if you've opted in. As you probably know, opt-in rates nationwide are usually less than 10%. So it's only reaching a small percentage of your community. But that is a really critical path that people do use to alert people. And so perimeter can be embedded in that alert or embedded in a website that's being shared in that alert. So that's one of the channels. Many people go to social media for information during disasters. And so we integrate there so that when an agency, let's say they're posting on Facebook an update or to Twitter, etc., when they include the perimeter link, even if the message that they posted on Facebook, like evacuation order for Grizzly Peak area, that evacuation could, like what the text that they wrote, that could become misinformation. It could become outdated. The biggest challenge with social media is these algorithms are not pushing things based on what is timely and based on what is accurate. And so something might go viral because of the way that people are engaging with it. That's how algorithms push information, is based on engagement. So what we've found is, even if you make a post that technically becomes misinformation, but it might be the engaging post because, let's say it was the second message, and the second message is always the one that people stop and hear. They're like, oh, okay, if I've gotten 2 messages, then something needs to happen. I need to do something. And so that might be the most engaging thing. But if it includes the perimeter link, then when someone sees that on their Facebook or Twitter, etc., they are going to be able to go to a real-time picture of what's happening. So it's not just the text, it's click here to see the live updates. And so that's where we're able to not just reach more people, but reach people with the accurate information. And what we see is once the perimeter link starts getting sent out, it will go viral pretty quickly because the media will pick up the link and they will reshare it. And we'll go from having, 100 users in a city that, let's say, take Reno as an example. Maybe people are using perimeter to see road closures and special event details on perimeter. So let's say we have 100 users. For a fire, we might skyrocket to 3 million users in the area, all trying to get this information because of the virality, because the media is sharing it, because it's going viral on social media. And what we see is when you're able to reach that many people, there's a huge reduction in non-emergency 911 calls because people are no longer calling 911 trying to figure out if they're in the evacuation zone because they have a little blue dot that has jumped right to their location and shows them what's happening around them.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Do you have the answer to getting our opt-in rates up? Because it is a struggle to get people, and it is that we talk about the fire service being reactionary and needing to get ahead of things. It's the public as well. And I don't know if you've seen any success stories out there because we sure are struggling.
I have an answer, but you're not going to like it. My answer isn't when people say, well, how do we get our opt-in rates up? I like to take a step back and say, well, your goal is not necessarily to get your opt-in rates up. The broader goal is to be able to reach more of the public with the life safety information that they need. And so if you take a step back, and that's the question that we're asking, what I see is, well, let's look at the data around how people actually operate during an emergency. When you come from a public safety family or you yourself are a first responder, advanced planning is in your blood. That is what you do. That is what we do. When I was a kid, we would have at the dining room table, we would sit around and we would have a plan for what would happen. If there's an emergency, here's how you're going to get out your window. We're all going to meet at the light post, like the lamp post. That is our reunification point. Like growing up in a first responder family, you're advanced planning all the time. I knew the term situational awareness when I was 5 years old. If we were ever misbehaving in Target or something, my mom would look at me and she'd say, Bailey, have some situational awareness. I was like, oh, gotta have some situational awareness. And so, but the public, if you're not from a first responder family or you aren't a first responder, advanced planning is not part of your world. And so if we look at the data of who opts in, we get a pretty good understanding of how many people are planners in that respect. And if you're a planner, there's it's not a bad chance that you are going to end up going into public safety because you already have that skill set. So to answer your question about the opt-in rates, the way that I think about it is, well, how can we understand how people actually behave during an emergency? And how can we reach them in the places that they go for information? And so that's why we spend so much time understanding the social media trends and the way that people need to understand information and the barriers that exist in terms of them getting that information. Connectivity being a great example. Connectivity can be a huge challenge, both for a fire, a flood, a hurricane, or for a special event. And so we learned early on, okay, we have to process all of this data in a way that is truly as lightweight as possible so people have the best chance of actually loading this information during the planned event or the emergency. And so we love spending a ton of time understanding the psychology behind why people are doing what they're doing and where they end up when they're looking for information in order to solve some of those problems. And if you look at alerts, the infrastructure for the alerting system was developed after 9/11. And it's built on the fact that the technology that we use to communicate was primarily text-driven, were text messages. This is the pre-iPhone. And so now the way that people receive, look for, and share information is completely different than 2001, 2002, when these companies were being built out. And so I think there's also an innovator's dilemma that exists in companies that have been around in public safety for 20 years, because what they started with might not actually be the solution that people are looking for today.
Yeah, don't be Blockbuster. Be Netflix, right?
Definitely.
So I'd love to talk a little bit more about your experience with the fire service specifically. Like, I think that this is probably true in every industry, right? Like, we only know what we know, and sometimes we need to get out of our own ways a little bit. So I would just love a little bit of your perspective, what you found coming in. And I know you knew a little bit already because you grew up in this family, but it had to be a little bit different coming at it from a professional standpoint. Were there things that you learned really fast about us that you didn't know before, or things that surprised you?
Something that surprised me is, very early into this work, I, of course, learned the phrase 200 years of tradition unimpeded by progress. And that felt strange as a phrase that continued to go around, because if I looked at my dad, he's not showing up with as a tech Luddite when he shows up at the fire department. He's showing up with all of the same apps and tools and workflows that we all use as consumers. He's showing up and he's using, I don't know if my dad was using DoorDash, but he's using Find My Friends. Like, he's using all of these new apps and expecting that the apps that he downloads are going to be easy and intuitive. And yet he'll show up at the fire department and be handed a clipboard, and all of this information will be written down and then communicated via phone calls, radio, etc., through this long communication chain. And we know how much changes, how much is miscommunicated when there are 5 different people involved in that process. And so when I heard that phrase, I understood the history of where it was coming from, but I already started to see that it wasn't going to live up to the history that it had, because people are already starting to change and they're already starting to expect that technology is going to be easy. And so when I got into this space, it was early to the wildfire technology world. And so I realized that, well, if adoption is going to take time, then I have to ask, how do I build this thing for the long game, and not to try to make some, get rich quick scheme. Building in public safety is not a get rich quick scheme. You have to find a way to play the game for at least 10 years, or you won't be able to reasonably get in the door and develop the use cases and the success stories that lead to the adoption down the road.
Yeah, I was curious. I think about that phrase all the time when I talk to people who are trying to, push technology in our industry, because I don't think it's totally true. Like you said, I think more often than not, more of us are saying, "Hey, what do we need to do to take this on?" I think a lot of it comes down to ego, and not ego necessarily in a bad way, but firefighters don't want to be wrong. We're trusted to go out and solve problems, and we do a really, really good job at that. And so I think anytime we don't have all the information, it can be a kind of a hit to the ego. So then it becomes we just go into protective mode with that. And yeah, I don't know if you resonate with that at all.
Absolutely. It reminds me of another answer to your question, something that surprised me. I thought that as we started to do the research and understand some of the biggest challenges in the space, I thought that people would receive us with open arms when we came to say, hey, we have the solution. What I learned is, first responders, it is your job to have the answers when no one else knows what to do. And the stakes of having those answers are people's lives. So the stakes couldn't be higher. And so I learned that if you go into the public safety space and you go in as this technologist who says they have the answers, having never been a first responder for a day in their life, people aren't going to trust you. They're going to say, how could you possibly know what I'm dealing with, having never been in my shoes, having never lived in this world? And so we learned that, okay, in every single conversation we go into, we never pitch perimeter without asking the questions to truly understand what their unique challenges are from their perspective. Because if you go in and you pitch a solution to someone who hasn't actually told you what their challenges are, even if you have the right solution, it's not going to be a productive conversation because you haven't built that trust. And this is a trust-driven ecosystem from day one. And so it takes longer, but it's how you go through the long process of actually working with and selling into the government. Is you have to build that trust from day one.
Yeah. And as you've seen, we don't have huge innovation budgets either. And so it's got to be right. And I think that that's one area that's a little bit different than the private sector for us, is that we don't have chief innovation officers. We don't have innovation budgets. Over 95% of most fire departments, 90 to 95% of most fire departments budgets, every dollar goes to personnel because it's so expensive to run a fire department. And then you think about the cost of the equipment anymore. And, a basic fire engine is going to cost you over $1 million, which is almost twice what it cost you 10 years ago.
Right.
And so we have to get it right when we get it right, or when we decide to jump into something new as well. And so I don't know if you've experienced that, but I think we need a lot of absolutes, and it's hard to offer that sometimes.
Definitely. And Silicon Valley has this opposite mindset, which is Silicon Valley says, move fast and break things. That doesn't work in public safety. Your solution has to work on day one. It has to work the first time someone's logging into it, because if it doesn't, they are not going to pull it out again. You don't get redos in public safety. And so we have to ditch the idea that, let's just move fast and break things and get something in people's hands. And I think that's why most companies that try to build in public safety fail, because they go in like the engineers that I just mentioned, they show up and they pitch the solution, and they're not genuinely building a relationship to understand that person's challenges and what their department is going through and what's unique about their community that might be different from another community that you've worked in. So they're not going in with that curiosity. They're going in as if they're the expert, but they're not the expert in public safety. And so that's one of the first things that kills companies in this space. The other is going in and, not being able to actually build something with this long-term perspective. Because if you're going in thinking, I'm just going to spin this up, I'm going to move fast and break things, and in a year, everyone's going to be using my solution. Go sell to consumers. Go sell to someone who can swipe a credit card and pay $15 for whatever it is that you're doing. Don't work with the government. You have to go through a long procurement process with the government, even if what you're selling is free. Right. It is a long process.
So true. Yeah.
And so it's funny because earlier you said in leadership and in any kind of success, a big part of it is just being able to stay in the game and being able to, have that overnight success 10 years in the making. And I think a big part of staying in the game is choosing the right game for you. Because what keeps you going and what keeps you inspired might be totally different than someone else. For a tech person like me, I look at the challenges in government and public safety and I say, this is awesome. This is so complex. Let's go do this. Some other people might look at that and say, no way. That is too hard. That is too irritating. People are frustrated by working with government. If you're frustrated by your end user and the processes that go into building it, might be good for you to pick a different game. For me, I love it because I love building a real relationship with our partners. I love that they will text me and check in. We'll have a conversation or, jump on a phone call just to be able to talk and catch up. That really feels like success to me. And it's funny because when I was first listed on Forbes 30 Under 30, I thought that was going to feel like a big success. But it felt good for about a minute, and then I was like, okay, gotta go back to my real job and the work in front of me. But what really does feel like a success is when I get a call from one of our partners or one of our customers just to check in and catch up on things and see how they're doing. And when someone is proactive with me like that, that makes it all worth it. it makes it feel like we really are having the kind of impact that we want to have and building the kind of relationships that we want to have in this process. Because all of business is building relationships.
Yeah, and you do have to build a heck of a lot of patience when you're working with the government.
Yeah.
But you said you need to like that game that you're in, but you also need to really understand the game you're in before you can even get into it. And I think that's where a lot of people are. Where I'm finding, I get pitched all the time. Tech companies coming in with the next best thing, and you can tell that they just don't even know that the game that they're playing in. And um, don't hate the player, hate the game. I didn't create the system, but we need to figure out how to work together in it and work within all the ambiguity and all the nuance and all the bureaucratic hoops. But in the end, if you can stick with it, I think it does provide a more fruitful outcome. And like you said, you get the satisfaction of knowing you've done some good. And I think it's a 2 steps forward, 1 step back all the time in everything we're doing. And
Yeah. And
it's got to be such a challenge.
It is such a challenge. And the truth is, there is no vanity metric that is ever going to make you happy. There's no award you can get. There's no number you can hit in terms of money, social media, follow. Like there's nothing that's ever going to make you feel like a success other than doing the work and feeling like you're doing something that really matters to yourself and is truly in service to someone else. If we are building everything around ourselves and trying to achieve some metric or milestone that we think is going to make us feel that sense of fulfillment, we will be disappointed, because as soon as we achieve a milestone, there's always the next milestone. We're always going to move the goalpost, especially if you're a first responder. You're an overachiever if you're a first responder. Like, you are working at a capacity that is extremely, extremely rare. And for many people, impossible to imagine. And so naturally, I think first responders and founders alike will achieve a milestone and then move a goalpost. And so we have to ask ourselves, what do I want to be doing where I'm actually playing a game that feels infinite to me? They say like infinite games versus finite games. The goal of an infinite game is to keep playing, not to finish. And so I think that's one of the big lessons that I've learned in terms of being able to really stay in the right game is, how can I build this and build this, not just the solution, but my life in a way that makes this feel like an infinite game that I really can't wait to keep playing. And that doesn't happen automatically. It happens usually by running into some brick walls along the way.
And you usually don't realize the success until you're far beyond it, too, I find. And are you a Simon Sinek fan?
Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah, love all the long game stuff. I think it was James Carse that wrote the first book on basically playing that infinite game, and then Simon picked it up and has run with it. As we start to wrap up a little bit, I'm just in awe by the fact that you did what you did, especially at a young age, and you've continued to develop this thing, because this wasn't a year ago or 2 years ago. This is, how long have you been in the game now? As we're talking,
7 years.
7 years.
7 years of the company, and 2 years before that in terms of the research that went into the company.
So I've got 2 daughters that just hit the grown-up world, and I want absolute best for them. I've got some rock star women in my department that are just doing amazing things, and the future is just so bright. Do you have any advice you'd give anyone, but especially a young woman wanting to do something big, something bold, or even breaking out into a new industry that's uncomfortable? Just any parting advice?
Yeah, absolutely. The first thing that I would say is, for a lot of women breaking into a male-dominated world, or if you happen to be the youngest person in the room as well, I've met a lot of women who deal, like me, with a lot of imposter syndrome. And that imposter syndrome is not unique to women. But I'll speak from my experience, which is for the first couple of years of building Perimeter, I was so insecure about not feeling qualified. And when I first started pitching investors, I asked people in Silicon Valley for advice, and I asked them, what is going to be a unique challenge for me fundraising that might be different for like my male counterpart? And what they said is, people are going to perceive you as less experienced than a male founder with all of the same qualifications. And so early on, I developed this complex around me being a disadvantage for the company and being afraid that if people saw that it was a young woman who was building this, that they might not take it as seriously. And for the first 2 years, I really carried that with me and, felt like I needed to prove that I could do this. And I had a conversation with a mentor a couple years in. I just had a pitch that didn't go well because I'd just come off the Kincaid fire and I didn't speak any of the investor lingo that they needed. I was just focused on the problem and how desperately we needed a solution to the problem. And so I bombed the pitch. And I had a conversation with my mentor after. And I said, I'm so embarrassed that I messed up so badly and that I just didn't do well in this environment. Someone gave me an opportunity to present and pitch, and I blew it. And he said to me, Bailey, I can't believe you don't see what the problem is. And I said, what? What's the problem? And he said, the problem isn't that you did a bad pitch. The problem is that you're self-absorbed. And I stopped and was like, what? And he said, yeah, you're making this pitch and this company, you're making it all about you right now and what people thought about you. And if you were embarrassed and if you weren't qualified, you're not making it about the work. If you start making it about the work, then you don't have to worry what people are thinking about you and if you're qualified. And I had asked for advice about imposter syndrome many times before that. But that was the conversation where it clicked for me. And I realized that if I'm not making this about my disadvantage and making this about the fact that I am the only woman at this table, or making it about the fact that I'm the only person in her 20s at this table, fresh out of college, no life experience, if I'm not making it about that and I'm making it about the work, then every single day I can show up and just do my absolute best. And every woman knows, especially any ambitious woman knows, that there is no room for mediocre women in this. We know that we have to work harder, that we have to work smarter, that we have to be so dedicated to be able to solve these problems. But the weight off of our backs that we don't need to carry is being consumed with whether or not we deserve to be in that room. When we can drop that story and say, listen, I might not be the most experienced person. I might not have as many years on the planet. I might not have all the answers, but I'm willing to show up. I'm willing to ask questions. I'm willing to learn. I'm willing to ask for advice, and I'm willing to keep working. And I'm willing to learn how to take care of myself in the process. Because if you burn yourself out, which you probably will if you try to start something, you're going to be so obsessed that you're going to forget to sleep and forget to eat and, forget to look outside and see the sun or, call your mom. You're going to forget to do all of that and you're going to end up burning out. I certainly did. I ended up in the hospital a couple times for ovarian torsion. Finally, some doctors came to me in my last time in the ER and they said, Bailey, are you really stressed? Because this is weird that it's happening all of a sudden. And I learned, I have to learn to take care of myself in this process too, which wasn't really on my radar before that. And so when you're willing to say, I'm going to dedicate myself to the work and not make things about me, it makes it so much easier to walk in the room as the only woman at times and not look around and say, oh my God, what are they going to think about me? And if you're thinking, what are they going to think about me? You're losing your power because you're not able to bring what people really need from us, which is we need to show up with conviction when we're there to share something. And if all of that is based on, oh gosh, what are they going to think about me? We're going to show up small and we're not going to have the impact that we really want to have. So that's the lesson that I learned that I wish I'd learned earlier. And I wish I could share with every woman who's walking into an environment where she is going to be either seen as inexperienced or where she is going to be underestimated.
Wow. Bailey, I think we could go on for hours, but I need to let you get on with your day. And I'm just so darn happy that we were connected. We had some
Me
mutual
too.
friends that connected us and knew we'd have a good time talking to one another. And I hope to continue this conversation. Thank you so much for everything you've offered today. Thank you for what you're doing in our industry. If people want to get a hold of you or have some curiosity about Perimeter, how can they best find you?
Yeah. So if you want to find Perimeter, our website is perimeterplatform.com. I am very reachable on LinkedIn. So Bailey Farren, Perimeter, that's how you can find me. If you want to shoot me a message, if you listen to this, if you want to chat about Perimeter, I would love to have a conversation with you. And so please send me a message, send me a connection request, and would love to continue the conversation there.
Thank you, Bailey. And for all of you, if you have future show ideas, please email opstalk.wfd@gmail.com. And please like, subscribe, share the show, get it out there to the people who can use it. And we'll see you next time.